Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. I'm Daniel McAdams, normally the co-host, but Dr. Paul is traveling today, so I will be in the driver's seat. Thankfully, I'm not alone, however. My old friend Phil Giraldi is joining us. Phil's been on several times with us before. We're always happy to have him back. Phil was a career intelligence officer in the CIA. He's now a writer for UNS.com, for the American Conservative, and he is the executive director of the Council on the National Interest. Phil, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Well, today we're going to talk about our favorite subject, Phil. That's the neocons, and particularly the what appears as slightly of a neocon crack-up in the presidential race. You know, we obviously here at the Liberty Report, we not only do we not have any favorite candidates, we're pretty much pouring scorn on all of them. But however, we cannot help but observe what's happening to the American political scene, to the Republican Party, the neocon hissy fit over the ascendance of Trump, who they feel, rightly or wrongly, is not sufficiently loyal to their plans. Now, Phil, you've got a piece out on UNS today about this topic. Maybe if you can run us down a little bit and give the viewers your take on what the neocons are up to.
Yeah, well, basically the piece makes the point, I think, that Trump seems to be taking a lot of criticism, much of it, of course, merited in terms of his own record, in terms of what he's been saying. But a lot of the criticism seems to be coming from neoconservatives, and it seems to be focused on his foreign policy. His foreign policy would seem, objectively speaking, to be one of his strong suits. He's saying a lot of sensible things about foreign policy. He's criticizing the march to war, for example. He's willing to talk to Putin. He's willing to talk to the Iranians. So he's saying a lot of sensible things, and so it raises the quandary of why are these people so caustically attacking Trump again and again. And I come to a conclusion that a lot of it has to do with their viewpoint of relationships with defense contractors, with the Israel lobby, many groups that are in favor of an aggressive foreign policy, and that the neocons are essentially afraid of becoming dispensable, shall we say, if there's a change in administration.
You know, neocons have always almost sort of counted on the Republican Party as their platform. They've infiltrated, and they've made America believe that their view of American foreign policy is the conservative view of foreign policy. Obviously, we view that differently. We view the idea of a global empire, the opposite of conservatism. But they've kind of taken for granted the fact that they are the Republican Party. And you make a point in your article, the fear of being irrelevant, the neocon fear of being irrelevant. Do you think that the neocons may be losing their hold on the American electorate, and that's what really has them terrified?
Well, one of the interesting things about the neocons is they've managed to infiltrate both parties. That they stress their relationships with the GOP, which of course are pervasive. They basically have defined foreign policy for the Republicans for at least the last 20 years. But they also have their inputs into the Democrats. Hillary Clinton is basically, in terms of foreign policy, a neocon. She has basically had a number of neocons working for her at State Department, and a number of leading neoconservatives now are indicating that they're going to vote for her. So they have this bipartisan ability to shape foreign policy. Now, what we need to break this is a revolution. And what they're particularly fearful of is, from the left, a Bernie Sanders, who would be a revolutionary change in foreign policy, one suspects. And from the right, we have Donald Trump, who essentially would be a dramatic break for the GOP, since he's criticized very heavily a lot of the current policies. So the neocons are terrified that somebody's going to, as I put in the article, they're going to break their rice bowl. It's going to take away all these nice think tanks that they live in and that they are well paid to work in, and suddenly the playing field will be changed.
You know, Dan Sanchez over at antiwar.com has an article out today which I think makes a good point, which is historically, if you look at something like the Trump phenomenon, you can look back to Reagan, who ran as a radical. He was a Goldwater conservative. He ran as a radical. The establishment couldn't stand him at the time. But once he got in, he became a unifier. He made his peace with the establishment. He stopped talking about trilateral commission and these sorts of things, and really opened the door of the GOP to the neocons. So Dan makes the point that if Trump is successful, he may well do the same thing. None of us know what he will do, frankly, but it's interesting, and it seems to me as if the neocons are panicking because they feel that they don't have a 100% certainty that they'll be in the driver's seat. There's that little bit of a question that something might change come election time.
Yeah, and I think that's a legitimate fear on their part. I mean, if I were Donald Trump and I were looking out over the field at the moment, I would be remarking on the fact that it's the neocons at the National Review and at the Weekly Standard and at the Wall Street Journal, at the Washington Post editorial page, are the ones that are really slamming him. And he will certainly, if he becomes president, adjust that. I'm not saying that he's going to go so far as to hire you or me to advise him on foreign policy. That doesn't seem to be a likely prospect. And he'll probably wind up with someone who is kind of an acceptable neocon light. But nevertheless, this is a dramatic change in the status quo.
And you mentioned Hillary, of course. The big news last week, we were so shocked that Robert Kagan did a piece in the Washington Post saying, I'm going to take my toys and go home if I don't get Rubio, whoever it is he's behind. But, you know, as you point out, it really is a kind of a smokescreen. It's kind of a game because Mrs. Robert Kagan is a longtime Hillary Clinton aide. Before that, she was a Dick Cheney aide. You know, these people don't really have a lot of emotional ties to any party. Their tie is to power, is to keeping positions of power. Someone wrote, maybe it was Sanchez, you know, Bill Kristol's Cheshire Grin on the Sunday morning talk shows. I mean, he couldn't live without that. But what I'm wondering, actually, and just history may inform this, that the neocons, once they see if there is an inevitability of Trump, once they see that, which ones will actually break off and start singing a different tune? This guy looks like he's going to get in power. We've got to do something. We already have people like Giuliani and Chris Christie, who I would say maybe not the neocon A team, but they certainly have been associated with neoconservative ideas. You know, will we see some sort of a landslide once they say, geez, this guy's going to win, we've got to start cozying up to him?
Yeah, I think there will be some dancing back and forth on this issue. The neocon trick, of course, is to have both sides covered. So we'll have a number of neocons that will be advising Victoria Nuland, Kagan, who will be advising Hillary Clinton, and you'll have a number of neocons who will be advising Trump. As I say, it won't be the neocons who've made the biggest effort to smear Trump. It'll be some other neocons. Nearly all of the GOP candidates, I'm sure you're aware of this, are coming from the same pool of experts, so-called experts. It's the John Hay Initiative, it's Chertoff, it's all the people that came up with the Bush administration. And so it's inevitable that whoever becomes president will turn to these same experts to a certain extent. What we want to do, of course, people like ourselves, is to mitigate the extent to which it's necessity to turn to these people, because these people have been poisoned.
Yeah, that's interesting you'd mentioned that. I remember I wrote a piece a while ago, and I'm sure we mentioned it on the Liberty Report too, the John Hay Initiative. Every single candidate except for Rand Paul and Donald Trump were going there for their foreign policy experts. You know, and we see, you know, certainly Rubio, if you look down the list of people he has, Dov Zakheim, plenty of others who are affiliated with this. The strongly worded letter, I think this is really funny, Phil, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it. The neocons wrote a strongly worded letter warning that they're going to jump to Hillary if Trump is successful, and it just reminds me of how absurd it is. These are the great experts. These are the guys who are behind the Iraq War, which is a disaster. They're behind our aggressive foreign policy in the Middle East, which has been a disaster. They were enthusiastic about Libya, even though that was a left-wing humanitarian intervention, which is a disaster. Everything they touch is a disaster. By what virtue does America and the world consider these people experts? Do you ever wonder that?
They find their virtue in the fact that they're a self-sustaining engine. They have their friends in the media, they have their friends in political circles, and so they kind of keep grinding on because they're self-approving. They approve of each other. When they write a book, they go and they put glowing blurbs about how great this book is. It all comes from them. So they've been able to run this self-sustaining engine for quite some while. That's why I think it would be interesting to take a stick and stick it in the spokes. And one should note the ultimate irony in all this, which is that Trump is a creation of the failed policies that they have been pushing. Trump would have no momentum if the policies that the neocons have been pushing for the last 20 years had actually been good for the country and effective. But of course they're not, and Trump is able to play this. He's able to say Iraq was a huge mistake. He's able to make himself look distinct from the rest of the Republican pact, and this has really benefited him.
It's interesting, I don't think it was Kagan. I think it was the editorial board of the Washington Post, but one of these, they're all the same very much, referred to Trump as a Frankenstein monster. And I think, interestingly, what you said sort of suggests that is the case, but not in the way that they would have us believe. It's a Frankenstein monster that they created. And it's not just that, it goes back to the Ron Paul movement, how it was quashed through very nefarious means. And then the Tea Party arose, and look how quickly that was infiltrated by the neocons. All the anger against government was rerouted back toward wanting a more robust foreign policy. But the other thing, Phil, and I'm going to have to shut it down in a couple of minutes, but the other thing we haven't talked about is money, and I think money sustains the neocons. And some people have talked about the fact that America seems as if it's becoming an oligarchy. You have a few well-heeled billionaires who can really affect the political process in a very distorted and deformed way by sending millions of dollars here and there. We have Sheldon Adelson and Paul Singer, who are on the side of Rubio and Cruz. We have Haim Saban, who is on the side of Hillary. These are very wealthy individuals who, in some ways, when it comes to foreign policy, are very much in favor of an aggressive U.S. foreign policy, especially in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, that's obviously, follow the money is always a good line because it's true. The neocons, if you go through a list of their think tanks and other institutions in Washington, first of all, there's a multitude of these institutions. They're all well funded. And the neocons have senior positions that are basically sinecures. They show up at meetings, they speak, they claim to be experts on various issues, but it's money that fuels all this. These guys wouldn't be sitting there, making $250,000 with a secretary in a nice room with a view of the Capitol if it weren't for the money, and that's to a certain extent what they're in it for. They pretend to be high-minded individuals doing things for the good of the United States, but that's a fraud. These people are in it for very clear objectives that are self-serving.
Well, Phil, I think we could probably talk for another couple of hours about the neocons and not exhaust all the topics. But I think just chatting with you a little bit about the neocon crack-up and where we expect things to go, I certainly appreciate drawing from your expertise. Unfortunately, I don't think they'll be defeated at the ballot box because of the very reasons that you've mentioned. But you and I and Dr. Paul and so many others are fighting a different kind of battle of ideas, and hopefully we'll be able to slowly but surely turn the tide toward a more pro-American and a more rational foreign policy. So thank you so much for joining us, Phil. We really enjoy having you. And I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Remember, supporting the alternative media, the Liberty Report, the Ron Paul Institute, and so many others is important if you want to continue getting information that's not chewed up and spit out by the mainstream. So please subscribe to the Ron Paul Liberty Report, youtube.com/, someone reminded me, Ron Paul Liberty Report. Check out what we do at the Ron Paul Institute. We have new articles up every day. Get in touch with us, support us, give us your feedback. We rely on you when we want to help you understand some of the things that we've been working on for so long. So thanks once again for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.